So welcome everyone to tonight's talk. One of the many things I deal with in my job as an agricultural inspector for the county is problems with invasive weeds. And you can broadly categorize basically invasive weeds into three groupings. Complete accidental introductions such as tansy ragwort and yellow star thistle that came in generally as contaminants with hay or seed shipments from Europe. Deliberately, stupidly introduced plants such as Scotch broom and Pampas grass used for slope stabilization, soil. And the final category, what we're going to be focusing on tonight, are escaped garden plants. Basically, flowers and shrubs that people enjoy in their gardens, but that have a nasty habit of spreading on their own or by wind or birds. So we have two speakers tonight, kind of breaking it up between problem with invasive weeds and kind of what to plant as an alternative. And first up is Jennifer Wheeler. She has been a botanist with Bureau of Land Management in Arcata for 26 years and knows all too well the problems with invasive weeds. So without further ado.
So I'm going to go really fast and hope to inform and entertain, so that if I go over just a little bit, hopefully that will be okay with you all. So first, a couple concepts, just some general weed business that I'd like to get through before I tell you 9 case stories on some garden escapes here locally that I have experience with controlling in the wildland setting. In general, there's about 5,600 plants in California. The majority of them are native. There's quite a huge segment of plants that are non-native, and a much smaller segment of the population of plants are invasive. Approximately 75% of the plants were introduced from the horticultural industry. I tried to actually look up where I pulled that from and found a number of other references that were even higher than that. So I don't have a particular source for that, but one thing that's important, what makes some non-native plants invasive? There's a number of things that make plants invasive. They have robust vegetative growth, a high reproductive rate, high seed set, high germination rate. Probably one of the most important things is they have no insect or wildlife predators or environmental variables that contain them from spreading uncontrolled. So that's a really important one. Most native plants have predators upon the vegetation or their seeds, and they just don't increase that much, so they all play nice in the sandbox with each other. This is a really important diagram, I have to go quick here, but you can see right here where it says public awareness typically begins. By the time this weed has grown and we're getting up into the orange, the public starts to go, hey, have you seen that weed over there? I have too, it's at my house. Well, that's when public awareness begins. It's too late to eradicate it. Generally, by the point that everybody notices it's a problem, it's already too late, extremely expensive. The time to actually focus on eradicating an invasive weed is when it's way back here, when most people don't even know it. So early detection and rapid response is a really important thing. Education, prevention, that's what we focus on in the agencies. I should go back here. If a plant gets way up there and it's really spread, you just have to decide whether it's worth controlling in a very specific area for a very specific purpose. Here's another little interesting chart. This is for an annual seeding plant, just to show you how important it is. It illustrates how important it is for quality control when you're removing a weed in your yard that you really want to get rid of, like a nasty little oxalis or something like that. You've got to get rid of 99.9% of the seed when you do your weeding. If you get rid of 99.9% of the seed in about 2 years, you might have gotten rid of that plant. But if you miss 5% of the seed, you're not ever going to get rid of it. Think of annual grasses that you don't want in your yard. You ever get rid of them? Maybe you miss just 3%. Well, okay, in about 12 years you might get rid of it. It's just a good example of how important it is to be thorough when you do your weeding. Mechanisms of escape, I don't want to spend a lot of time here. There's natural ways, there's man-made ways. Throwing the weeds over your neighbor's fence, not a great idea. Dumping them out on BLM lands out of Samoa, not a great idea. But there's lots of ways that people deliberately and inadvertently spread weeds, and that nature spreads weeds. Some of the key management objectives, just really quickly, we want to do some prevention, some education, we survey, we map, we detect those weeds, we respond as rapidly as we can, we monitor the situation for years afterwards, and restore if necessary. So that was actually a homecoming parade by Mac High, and I took that picture, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Pampas grass, like 100,000 seeds per frond. I was like, ah! And then maybe you've seen the booth at the Humboldt County Fair. Lots of different agencies, we and nonprofits, organizations that have some influence over managing publicly accessible lands. We work to try and educate the public. We have a booklet here and some brochures. That's an older picture of the group when we were a Humboldt County and Del Norte County entity. And all right, so let's talk about some plants that have been brought in as a pleasurable garden yard plant that we love for whatever reason, and then gets out into wildlands, and then federal agencies and the public and volunteers and everybody have to get together and try and deal with it. So I'm going to take you through 9 short stories. So the first one is yellow bush lupin. It has an old introductory story. So I don't have a picture of his wife, but this is George Cobb, but it was his wife that brought yellow bush lupin to Humboldt County from San Francisco. He got a job as being a fog signal station keeper out at Samoa, and his wife brought up some yellow bush lupin to plant around their little cottage because she loved them. They're beautiful, they smell nice. And well, they increased. So here's a picture from 1915 to 1920. This is out at Samoa. The fog signal station was closer to the harbor mouth, but you don't see any yellow bush lupin in this picture. That might be English ivy on that shed, I don't know. But the point is you don't see yellow bush lupin. Now here by 1939, you see yellow bush lupin all over the place. And this area right here is the source of the seed that the Army Corps of Engineers hired women to spread the seed all along the railroad tracks along the North Spit from this population that Theodore planted. So that was the source of this plant. And actually, so here's the South Spit, 1972-73, and you can see the yellow bush lupin jumps out because it's blooming. And so you can see it spreading, and so either the seeds floated across the harbor mouth or birds tipped it across, but you can see it spreading. And interestingly, there's no beach grass here yet either. It didn't start to appear until 1974, 76. So let's jump ahead a little bit. The yellow bush lupin isn't responsible for the beach grass arriving or spreading, but yellow bush lupin has nitrogen-fixing nodules on the root, the taproot, that feeds annual grasses, and well, feeds grasses, and beach grass is a grass. So it provides nitrogen that feeds a lot of other stabilizing plants. So, which is why I included this shot of what happened just in about 25 years. The whole west side of the South Spit was covered in beach grass, but we have restored about a mile of it so far by hand. By hand. Think about that. That's a lot of effort. A lot of young people building character and reflecting on what they want to do with their life, and how they've come to this point, and all kinds of things, lots of time to think. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you a little bit of the progress and a little before and after. That's from 2006, and this was, I think, oh gosh, this is just more recent. I thought I had a date on it. I think it was just this past year. Progress being made. Anyway, an inadvertent garden escape. Even the European beach grass is an escape, not a garden escape, kind of an industrial commercial escape, but that is an hour-long presentation, and I can't go into that. Here's another one, Bermuda Buttercup. All right, this story starts off, here's the Samoa Endangered Plant Protection Area. Well, look at that, isn't that beautiful? Look at all the rare plants. Yeah, see, you don't see any, right? And you see litter. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense at all. The public comes out here, don't walk in here, why not? It looks like I can. It looks like a weed pit. That's because that's what it is. That's all, a whole bunch of annual grasses, those little tiny white patches of sand. That's a little bit of the native dune mat, northern foraging plant community that's left. So this is before the Bermuda Buttercup invades. We were trying to deal with the yellow bush lupin and the annual grasses. Everywhere on the dunes where you see a patch of annual grass. You'll notice a lot of times it's in a circular pattern. That's because that's where yellow bush lupin had been and was pulled. So the yellow bush lupin brings the annual grasses, which brings a lot more nutrients and organic matter, and slowly more and more weeds can come in, and it just becomes overstabilized really quickly. Anyway, so here's just some before pictures. I'm going to move along. Yes, we took heavy equipment out there. We scraped up the top 6 inches. We buried all the weeds and all the seeds, and we raised up the bare sand. We spread it around. We flagged every native plant. We dodged every native plant. We brought in hand crews when it was too fine of work for the heavy equipment, and the guy was a really good operator. He did not harm a native plant. It was amazing. So then we had C's do all the fine work, and so 2 weeks later, and I'm going to have a before and after, we have that. Okay, so I'm really proud of this work. This was a lot of documentation, a lot of effort to get this done, and then somebody dumped yard waste, and Bermuda Buttercup started spreading into this area.
Oh my gosh.
And it spreads fast, and it spreads with little bulblets, not by seed. It's really difficult to get rid of. Well, I'm not going to go out there and spray herbicide with a water table that's really high. The most visitors to BLM land ever in our area is Samoa. So I'm not going to go out there and be spraying herbicide to get rid of this. And it wouldn't even work because you have to do it again and again and again and again because of all the bulbs. So I got this. This is a hot foam weed control machine. It killed with hot water before it turns to steam, 202 degrees. Totally organic. It did have a coconut oil surfactant in there that was totally natural that helped break the waxy cuticle of the plant. It worked great. Here we are doing it. People thought, what are you doing? Cleaning the dunes? Kind of that's what we're doing. And you can see that all of that mustard yellow stuff, that's all Bermuda Buttercup dying upon contact. So we had to do it again and again and again during the growing season. And then it worked so well. The area was incredible. We got rid of annual grasses, wild radish, all sorts of weeds. It was great. I don't have pictures of this, but the Waipuna caught on fire, nearly exploded my boss's SUV, could have died. The Waipuna's gone, the company's out of business. So that tool is gone. But it was super cool while we had it. All right, new story. Garden escape. This is near my house, a neighbor's house, really. It's English ivy gone wild, but ivy. Just a quick, everybody's pretty familiar with English ivy. It's really noticeable in the winter. That's a great time to go tackle it because it's so evident with all the deciduous plants drying back and the soil being a little bit wetter. It's easy to come up. Not going to go into all the methods to get rid of it, but it's just something we have to deal with. This is the 1 mile mark on your way out to Falk in Headwaters Forest. That was a whole 3 mile long corridor of English ivy, and we've gotten rid of it all, except for a couple little spots that we just can't safely get without people getting hurt. So we monitor and contain it. But that whole walk used to be, I could go through about 20 different weeds. And so this is an after picture. It's not a perfect match. It's the same area. I could show you the fork in that tree, but it's all gone. And we uncovered all kinds of features that we had no idea were there. And now it's a lovely native plant walk. And it was all done by hand. So one of the challenges with dealing with escaped garden plants can be terrain, wilderness, access, difficulty to get there to treat it, difficulty to survey and map it. This is the King Range, not an easy place to patrol for weeds. Cape ivy is one. It was reported to me like my first year here. You have Cape ivy out in the King Range. Oh really? Where? In a drainage about the middle of the King Range. Okay, well, by the time I actually found it, years later, it was an acre in size. He had seen just the plant out on the beach at the upper strand, and now it was a full acre. And it turns out they thought that a single plant couldn't produce viable seed by itself, so I wasn't too worried about it. We were just containing it. But then new research showed that the plant could self-pollinate and create viable seed all by itself. Great, so now we better get it so it doesn't spread all over the King Range because it does this. It's like a kudzu. It's a member of the aster family. Anyway, so here's just a few pictures. There's the unnamed drainage that it had filled. It also was loaded with poison oak. So the CCCs had to get out there. They did the toughest work before a local nonprofit took over maintaining it at bi-monthly intervals. We've just about got it completely eradicated, but they worked in the cold and camped in the snow, and they have to hike in all their equipment for miles, and it's hard work, and wash in a cold stream the poison oak off. It's awful, but it's almost gone. Here's another one that escapes, gopher weed. Well, you know what? It's not gonna keep gophers out of your garden. They'll go around the plant. So this plant, gopher weed, it's toxic, it's flammable, it has a high level of hydrocarbon, you can make gasoline from it. If it was economically feasible to do that, we could make gas from gopher weed. And it has a toxic substance, it can cause rashes and everything. Anyway, there's a home out here, this is Big Flat in the King Range, there's a home out there. And they had it planted in their little garden, and it shoots its seeds about meters at a time. Different times of year, multiple times. So it had been quietly spreading its seeds, you know, plant here, plant there, nobody really noticed it. Not a problem. Then we had a fire. Fire swept through the King Range, and all of a sudden, it was 125 acres. That whole area went, you can see the trees are burned, the whole thing flushed with gopher weed, a toxic, non-native, invasive plant. It had never been known as a wildland invader before this happened. So I reported it to California Invasive Plant Council. It's on their list now.
How does the fire spread?
I think it just caused the seed bank to flush and germinate. I think it must be scarified by heat or smoke or fire. Something about the fire caused this, a big germination event. So it had been spreading in a pretty low-key way without anybody really noticing. Anyway, so in phases, we got rid of it through hand treatment and CCC cruise spikes out there. So it's gone. You can take your hike. Success in the weed world is what you don't see. When people go hiking and they say, "Oh, what a lovely park! It's so lovely," and you don't see weeds. There could be, but there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears there so that you can enjoy those native plants. And a lot of our areas are like that. And I'm really proud of what you don't see on BLM lands on the coast. Here's another one, Pampas grass. I'm not going to go into this very much, but 100,000 seeds per frond, wind dispersed. The seeds aren't viable for that long, like 2 to 3 months. So if they don't land on raw, sterile, germinable soil, they're probably not going to take off. And they need full sun, they don't do well in shade. But we've got to cruise this terrain to get rid of them, and we do. We've even repelled the cliffs. Now, she's pointing at somebody. I just want to show you that they're repelling. We tried really hard to reduce the infestation in the King Range, to contain it between two creeks, because there's a lot of area we just can't get it. So the only option is containment. Just making sure. Okay, broom. Here's another one. Boy, this is a real threat to grasslands. Has a really long-lived seed bank. Here's a screenshot from Cal Weed Mapper showing how many 7.5-minute quadrangles it occupies in California. It's really bad up in Oregon and Washington. Here's some mapping we've done locally in the King Range, some of the sites that we have to get to out in the King Range. We treat it all over the place, usually manually with the weed wrenches. Maybe you've seen those before. Here's an example of it in action. We even tried using the Waipuna machine that I showed you earlier to get all the little seedlings that come up next year. It wasn't really effective because there was limitations on that, and the seed bank is so full of seed. I think it's just kind of better to pull them up and disturb the soil to keep flushing the seeds out so that you can deplete it quicker and more thoroughly. Plus the machine's dead, so we can't use it anyway, but we tried. Almost done, Japanese knotweed. This is a big one that the Humboldt Weed Management Area got a $450,000 grant to attempt to eradicate it from Humboldt and Del Norte County. It is a major threat to riparian resources and fish. I will try and tell this story really quickly. It comes up through asphalt, through house. I mean, this really is the kudzu or puncture vine of our area. And we had maybe less than 10 acres worth when you combine the 100 of infestations that we logged. It wasn't that much. It was we felt it was eradical. So what it does is it grows on the edges of riparian areas, and then it dies back in the winter, exposing the banks, so all the soil goes into the river and covers up any of the rocks and everything, and any fish eggs would suffocate. So, and it actually grows from the riverbed also. It knows no boundaries. It has no boundaries. So there's an example of it dying back, and it only takes 1/8 of a gram of root material for a new plant to form. So any fragment of it will create a new plant. So it might live quite well in your yard. You may not have a waterway, you may not chop it up and dump it in your neighbor's yard. You know, it might just be fine. I have that plant and it hasn't gone anywhere. Well, sooner or later, it's gonna wind up in a ditch or at the dump or something. And once it gets into a waterway, it spreads. The East Coast is inundated, Washington, and it's illegal to plant this in the United Kingdom. You could go to jail for having those plants.
Why don't we do that? I mean, not jail people, but why don't we say that it's illegal to sell Pampas grass and ivy?
English ivy.
I know, it's really difficult because there's a big economic incentive to sell it. It's something you can request. You can request to Nursery. So I'm going to get to my final slide. We actually dug it up in the little parking lot, a brand new parking lot. It went through the fabric and destroyed. We dug it up, got rid of it. It was about $30,000, but we manually got rid of it and burned it up at the Fairhaven fuel when the power plant was going. We burned it and made energy out of it. So yeah, it's just an incredible plant. There's so much biomass underground, it's unreal. You could never tarp it long enough to ever get rid of it. You'll just spread it. It'll just reach out beyond the tarp. Those are just some sites of the King Range. There's a JK injector. This is an herbicide injector that shoots into the cane. So very specific tool developed just for this plant. I was going to talk a little bit about classic biological control. This is kind of a cool, biological control is using insects that predate only upon that plant, goes through lots of rigorous testing. This is kind of how biocontrols work. Over here, you have a weed that kind of wax and wane with the weather, and then this gray line represents a biocontrol agent. It has to increase in its numbers, and it needs that weed to feed off of and live and reproduce, so it's never gonna eradicate a weed because it needs it to live. But as populations start to decrease, the beetle the insect will chase it, and you'll kind of come down to this lower level balance of the plant where it's kind of naturalized. Basically what you've done is introduced a predator to a plant that doesn't have a predator, and it starts to behave more naturally. That's sort of the goal of biocontrol. And we have one really successful case of that in Humboldt County. There's even a monument at the Ag Center on South Broadway to the chrysolina beetle that took care of the St. John's wort Klamath weed that ran all over Humboldt County during the 30s. And the ranchers were so excited and happy because their property values had plummeted. It was toxic to livestock. It was just displacing good feed. And this brought, I don't even worry about Klamath weed when I see it because I almost always see a beetle, but it's just kind of naturalized. It's here and there, but it doesn't take over. It's not problematic. Anyway, they pooled their money and created a monument to the beetle. And thanks. So how can you help prevent the spread of problematic plants? So this is not in a book. It's just what I thought of. Do a quick Google search on the plant that you want to buy at the nursery and see if it has a record of environmental assault. Is this an invasive species? Is this potentially a problem? If it is, and I really love the flower, maybe you could handle it, but really, I'd take care not to spread it, but I wouldn't even buy it. I'd find some kind of alternative because it's not worth the risk.
A little pot in your little never opening windows.
Right, keep it contained. Request that your local nursery not sell known invasive plants. Don't discard invasive plant parts anywhere but a fern pile, a composting green waste facility, for example. Some people compost and they don't compost thoroughly enough, and that just becomes a very fertile place. So if you're gonna compost, really compost it, or take it to a facility that's gonna compost it at high heat and really sterilize what you put in it, or burn it. Be very careful with the plants that are known invasive plants. And then one suggestion is replace invasive plants after you go through the work to get rid of it in your yard with native plant alternatives. I brought some brochures that the Humboldt County Weed Management Area made, suggesting some alternatives to invasive plants that are commonly planted in people's yards. And then I have a quick little thank you slide. This is a current project we're working on. This is the Trinidad Head area where the lighthouse is. We acquired this. Actually, it just went back to BLM ownership after the Coast Guard was through with it. They took down the Coast Guard barracks. This whole lawn area right here, this is a Pampas grass lawn. I'm not kidding. This is a Pampas grass lawn. This is all English ivy. Here's some Pampas. Here's some rhodies right here. Those are some not happy. You can see they're kind of yellowing and not really that great. There's Cape ivy out here. There's wild rose. There's so many weeds. And I'm like, really? Because I'm the weed person. So when we get these land and there's weed, Jennifer, what are you going to do about that? You know, I don't even like to weed my yard. You know, I weed 200,000 acres. That's some pressure. So there's the lighthouse right here. But look at it. See? And the cool thing is, this is a native grass. The seed wasn't that cheap. It's called Agrostis palens. It's a native perennial grass seed. And it took, and we planted it in the fall, right when there was a window of rain coming. Got it like on the ground moments before the rain started, and then it went dry, but we got it, and it's doing great. So we're gonna have annual public volunteer events in the fall out here, and we replanted with native plants. After we got the weeds out, we planted. We're gonna continue to weed around those native plants so that they do well, but there's still quite a bit more. It'll probably take 4 or 5 years to get the extent of the weeds that we can get safely. And then it'll be containment from there, because it's a very unsafe place to work. But, so we'll get what we can, and that's it.
So, won't take up too much time here, but next speaker up is my fellow committee member, Monty Caid, who runs Lost Foods, Native Plant Nursery, and more. So he's going to talk about different native plants and alternatives for gardening.
I guess the good news is that California is a world hotspot for native plant biodiversity. So we have more native species in California than all other states combined. And but part of the bad news is that we also have more endangered species of any other state. So that shows that we are damaging and losing our rich natural biodiversity. So some of the main causes, is habitat loss, and either from deforestation, which California has a lot of that kind of activity, as well as agriculture. California is a world hotspot for agriculture. And urban development. California also has a really big population of people. And so in all these areas, we have basically replaced the natural biodiversity with less biodiversity, or replaced it completely with non-native species. So why do we use all these plants from all over the world instead of the native species that evolved here for thousands and thousands of years? So I think part of the reason is that we aren't really aware that we live in such a biological hotspot, and many of these species we've never seen because they are rare and endangered. And so what we like to do is try and educate people on the importance of restoring this rich biodiversity and try to give people ways how they can actually help the situation. So since California, or since urban development is one of the biggest causes, anybody with a yard or access to some land or landscapes in city areas can actually make a really big difference. And some scientists are saying now that the plants that we plant in our yards will determine the species that go extinct. So the world, basically the whole world is going through an extinction crisis that a lot of us aren't aware of. And it's basically because of the destruction of the natural biodiversity and replacing it with other species. So, our native plants, one really cool thing about them too is that a lot of them produce edible nuts, seeds, fruits, berries, grains, greens, tubers, and other types of food. And we can incorporate those in our yards as edible plants that also sustain the local wildlife that evolved with these species for thousands of years. So we get more birds, more butterflies, and beneficial insects, and since they're adapted to the local climate, they really don't need, they're more drought tolerant, so you don't have to irrigate them as much or at all if planted in the right time of year. And they don't require pesticides or fertilizers because they're adapted to the soils. And so why can't our non-native species support our local wildlife? Like plants are plants, and why is it so special that native plants are the main structure of habitat? And so it really comes down to insects. And in our culture, we like to kill insects when we see them. You see them on your plant, it's causing damage. But the majority of insects that actually cause us damage and harm are actually non-native insects that came here on non-native plants. And then they escape into our yards, and there's no natural predator, so it's eating all your non-native leaves, and you have to spray it with pesticides and stuff. But the real function of insects and native plants, so basically native plants get energy, they create energy from the sun and create life on land for all other species. So the only thing that gets energy from the sun are plants. Every other species gets energy from another species that started with a native plant. So plants get energy from the sun. Their most beneficial role is passing that sun energy throughout the local food web, through our wildlife, and all the way up the food chain. And the way they do that is, or the most efficient way is through insects. And plants also don't want to be eaten by every single insect, so they have chemicals in their leaves and things that inhibit everything from eating them, because there's lots of herbivores out there that would just eat all the plant leaves if they could. So certain insects developed special relationships with plants where they eat the specific plant that they figured out how to get around that toxic chemical. So because every plant can have different toxic chemicals, those native insects can only figure out how to break down one or two of those toxic chemicals in the plant. So therefore, it creates a special relationship where these insects are specialists, and they depend specifically on a native plant that they've evolved with over thousands of years. So like a good example is the Monarch Butterfly. Like we are familiar with the Monarch Butterfly. It eats, its caterpillars can only eat the milkweed plant. The milkweed is a toxic plant to most everything else, but the Monarch Butterfly has developed a way for its caterpillars have figured out a way to overcome these toxins. And so without the milkweed, then the Monarch Butterfly cannot reproduce. So 95% of our butterflies are in that same position, where they depend on a specific native plant to lay their caterpillars for them to reproduce. And so the way that travels up the food chain is that birds, so 90% of our terrestrial birds depend on caterpillars to feed their young. And their caterpillars are soft and squishy and full of super nutrients and stuff. And these caterpillars are the main food source for baby birds. So you take the plants away, you don't have the caterpillars, then you don't have the bird population, and it just goes all the way up the food chain. And so it's not just caterpillars either, so all kinds of other insects eat the native plants and pass that sun energy through the food web. And insects is actually the most important food in our local food webs, and probably in the food webs of the whole world. It's all about insects. So so almost everything eats insects, or depends on a species that eats insects. So the other thing is that native plants also, so one other thing that native plants can do for us besides just attracting and sustaining wildlife is that they can produce super nutritious foods that humans can eat also. And so these foods are super high in nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, and plenty of other beneficial components. The other thing is like, so who cares about butterflies and birds, you know? And like, so what native plants create habitats of biodiversity with insects, wildlife, all this stuff working together. And that's the basics for ecosystems. And ecosystems create the possibility for life to exist on this planet. And ecosystems create our air, they create our water, they clean our air, they clean our water, they provide pollination. All of our foods came from some ecosystem, all of our medicines came from some ecosystem. Our houses are built from ecosystems. The oil and gas and energy we use is from old ecosystems. So ecosystems are very important, and when you lose your natural biodiversity, the ecosystems stop functioning efficiently, and things start to go wrong, and things can collapse and get out of balance, and the atmosphere. So by restoring native plants, we can restore our native biodiversity, which can restore our ecosystems. And our ecosystems, it might appear that everyth's nice and green out here, but the reason we have so many endangered species is because our ecosystems aren't functioning correctly. And so ecosystems also regulate weather, climate, and can prevent climate change. So there's a lot of talk about climate change, and a lot of it is a lot of like greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. Ecosystems are designed to clean those greenhouse gases and store them in living matter. So worldwide, like we have already lost like over 50% of our ecosystem functions, which means that we're pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and by eliminating we're eliminating the ecosystems that clean the greenhouse gases and sequester these carbons and stuff. And we're also, so we're destroying those ecosystems that solve the problem while we're pumping this stuff into the atmosphere. Whereas if we restored our native ecosystems, we could probably keep pumping stuff into the atmosphere, but the ecosystems would be able to handle the all that stuff. So, so the other thing is like non-native ecosystems perform at about a 10% rate as a native ecosystem would perform. So most of our landscapes and agriculture lands and stuff are functioning at 10% of historic ecosystem levels. So I believe it's really important for us to learn about our biodiversity, learn about what you can use native plants for, incorporate them into our urban areas, our agriculture lands as food crops, and maybe we could save our natural biodiversity and make, the more that we can restore, the more resilient the local ecosystem becomes, and the more likely we all are to continue surviving in actually a much more sustainable way by including our native plants and supporting our natural biodiversity.
What about
So
your
now-
nursery?
What's that?
What about your nursery?
Yeah, so we started a nonprofit organization called Lost Foods, and we run a native plant nursery. We specialize in edible, medicinal, and wildlife host plants for supporting bees, birds, and butterflies. So we're located at the Redwood Acres Fairgrounds. We're open to the public 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from noon to 5. We also create native plant sanctuaries, which preserve the native species that we can find, and the sanctuaries become our living seed banks where we can gather these seeds and propagate them at the nursery. And they also become butterfly and bird sanctuaries and educational centers for people to become familiar with the native species. So I have some really cool books up here and some posters and some free handouts and flyers, and all that stuff has like information about our nursery and stuff. So
Where are some of your plant sanctuaries?
our first one is on 2nd and H Street in Eureka, and it surrounds a city parking lot, and we started that in 2009. And the second one is on the 1000 block of E Street. Started that one in 2011. And the third one is right next to the nursery at Redwood Acres, and it's our biggest and most diverse sanctuary.
Did you guys plant some?
Yeah, so we planted 25 different species, over 100 plants total as a native hedgerow out there.
So Monty, if somebody came to you not knowing what they were doing, but wanting to redo their garden, would you help them and give them
Yeah.
some ideas and
Definitely.
help them with the plants?
Yeah, so that's another really good thing that the sanctuaries do. They become places where people can walk through the sanctuary and get ideas and see flowers that a lot of us have never seen before. And people are really surprised when they come that, oh, that's a native plant here? Like, I've never seen that. And yeah, so, and also, yeah, I can give you all kinds of ideas too. But, so we had a bunch of pictures up there of some diverse native plants, so you can also go to our website and there's some slideshows on there and photos, and we also have a YouTube channel. It's Lost Foods channel on YouTube, and there's some really awesome videos. Any other questions?
Maybe we could have Jennifer come back up as well, and we can have you both answer questions.
Yeah.
I'm here still.
We had a question over here. Was that for Monty?
Well, it was that really pretty flower that was the whole time, the blue, the very first one, the blue and yellow. I was just wondering what it was.
That one.
That one, yeah.
That's a penstemon.
The native penstemon?
Yeah, so there's actually multiple native penstemons. They're super beautiful flowers, attract hummingbirds and all kinds of stuff.
The California Native Plant Society has a wildflower show in May, and they hold it out in Manila, and they also have native plant
Actually-
sales also. So that's another source for getting ideas.
Do you only have native plants at your show?
No, I was just gonna say, the native plant has moved from Manila to the Jefferson Community Center
Okay.
because the school expanded too much, they weren't able to do it. So it's now the Native Plant Society Spring Wildflower Show is at the Jefferson Community Center, and they have a collection that they go out. I mean, it's not permanent. They cut, and it's in glasses of water, and they display all the different native plants, and then they sell potted plants that they raised at their site on Old Arcata Road.
How big of an area do you consider to be native? Like Northern California, Humboldt?
Oh, well, they're all native to whatever area you're in, so when they do the native plants, it's local natives. And they have a few, specimens, but they'll always identify it. But but when they go out, the local volunteers go out locally and collect, but they do a variety of habitats, so they'll go from the ocean up the mountain. So not everything's appropriate for every garden.
It's a good idea too, if you're planting for pollinators, bees, or birds, to try and stagger the flowering time in your yard, because creatures are hungry year-round, so they don't just need floral resources in the spring or summer. So there are perennial shrubs and other plants that provide those kinds of nectar and pollen resources year-round. Well, not year-round, but you stagger them. So ask those kinds of questions of CNPSers or Monty at Lost Foods, or do a little research, and that way you'll get visitation year-round in your yard.
Yeah, so usually just the more variety of local native species that you can include, the more likely you are to provide a food source throughout the year at different times.
I
Yeah.
know I will never remember all these, but as these flowers are going by, could you say their names?
That's the city hall parking lot. They just went all native, and how beautiful they are. And so there's rumors going around that like native plants aren't showy. And California, early explorers and botanists came from all over the world to study California's native flowers and sent them back to the kings, and they love our native plants in Europe. But
Calypso orchid.
What kind of orchid?
Calypso?
those are leading arts with a big bumblebee down at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's the red flowering currant. That's the one-leaf onion. Red elderberry. The Angelica lucida. So what's really cool about growing native foods is that you can use them and they make you healthier, and they also sustain our local wildlife. So
Righties and CPI, it's a rare wax currant.
Wax currant.
So also it creates you start to build, we can rebuild our relationship with the natural world by using or by restoring and using our native plants correctly. We can actually become a beneficial species in our local environment. And humans aren't necessarily beneficial right now. I believe that at one time we were. We just lost the connection to nature So native plants is like the ultimate connection to plug you right back in. And by eating them, you know, like that can go straight to your DNA and change your whole life. So we made nettle soup out there. So nettles, stinging nettles, is one of our most nutritious wild greens, and it's also said to be one of the most delicious. So it's super high in all kinds of vitamins and minerals. It's like higher in protein than most greens. It's so nutritious that it's used for medicinal purposes. But it also is a host plant to a few butterflies. There's the red admiral butterfly that only lays its caterpillars on stinging nettles. So, and also by being when it's fresh, it can sting you. And what that can do is nettles kind of likes to make a patch. So it also creates this habitat for delicate animals like frogs and salamanders or bird nests or anything, and it creates a stinging protection from other predators like maybe raccoons or skunks that would otherwise rush in there and eat the tender little critters. So it's a host plant to butterflies, beneficial insects, and it creates valuable habitat to things, and it's one of the most nutritious foods. So the more you learn about native plants and native foods, the more it just seems to hit all the bases of what we need to do.
It was delicious too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Berry bells, you can eat those, you just spit out the hard seeds. The red huckleberry. Those blue ones are globullias, and the pink is checker blooms. Checker blooms we grow as a salad green. Super pretty flower, but also a super delicious leaf. So most of our wildflowers have edible seeds, and just like we eat edible seeds, sesame seeds, flax seeds, whatever, there's the majority of our wildflowers were also seed crops. By Native Americans use them as seeds, as well as our grasses for grains.
That's a native rose.
That's the Old Town Garden on 2nd and H. That's one of our native snails. I don't know if you guys ever saw a native snail. Wild ginger.
I wanted to mention too that for our Party for the Planet on Earth Day, April 22nd coming up, we're going to be making that about our Native Plant Initiative and the things that Monty's been talking about today. We're going to encourage people to free day too, so we'll have a lot of people, if the weather's good, coming along, and we're going to be giving away free plants, about 500 or so will be donated by Monty's Nursery, and then Samara Nursery, and also Johnstein Tree Farm. And then we'll also have seed packets too. So everybody should come out and visit us on Earth Day. It should be a really fun day. And so thank you very much.